The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the EuroSTAR December webinar series. Today's presenter is Alexandra Casapu, and she will be presenting Fooled by the Unknown Unknowns from her track session at the EuroSTAR Conference 2013 in Gothenburg. If you have any questions for Alexandra, please type them into the questions field on your control panel, and I will address these questions to Alexandra directly at the end of the webinar. You can type your questions at any point during the course of the webinar. The webinar slides, as well as a recording of the webinar, will be available on the EuroSTAR website shortly after the webinar ends. You can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag ESConf. You can connect with EuroSTAR Conference by using the Twitter handle @ESConf, and you can also connect with Alexandra by using the Twitter handle @CoveredInCloth. I will now hand you over to today's presenter, Alexandra. Hello, Alexandra.
Hi, Darren. Okay, so I will show you my screen now. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandra Casapu, as Darren mentioned. I'm from Romania. I work at Alton, a company that focuses on software testing services only. I like my workplace because it fosters learning and creativity. And since I started working there, which also corresponds to the start of my testing career, I've been surrounded by a mindset that considers testing as a thought-provoking and enriching activity. So I work in an environment where I can exert my imagination, where I'm encouraged to bring change. I feel like I'm exposed to a lot of new learning material every day, but there is a limit to what I can focus on in order to assimilate the information that I have around me. So I'm also learning every day how to learn. In these lines, I want to share with you today a real learning experience that I had, an opportunity to learn new stuff, and part of the opportunity is the work that I put into the story, but that would not have been possible without the experience itself. So this is what I will cover. I will give you some context on a feature that I tested, how I tested it, and some after-the-fact analysis. What is central to my story is the realization of some of the unknown unknowns I was dealing with at the time when all this occurred, or rather the unknown unknowns that were dealing with me. So, about 1 year ago, I started working on a project as a remote tester for Granlund in Helsinki. My role was as a junior explorer tester. And one of their products is a real estate management system called Granlund Manager. That's the product that I focus most of my efforts on. At the time, the team was new to the test role entirely, as only 6 months before I joined, the first tester ever was introduced into the team. And they had been developing their product for 3 years before that without the help of testers. The team has now only 2 dedicated testers, one on site and me. And here is a picture of the actual software. In the menu you can see some of the features that the product has. And this is not all. The arrow hides many other features. As time passes, new features are being developed at clients' requests. The documentation is scarce in general. One of the challenges I generally face is to discover the functionalities through exploration and identify the relevant things that we need to focus on in testing. The characters in my story, apart from me, are Maret, an experienced tester that works on site as a tester and also manages me, Kenneth, who was project manager when the budgeting feature was implemented. He knew how the feature should work on a previous version of the software. The developer from Russia, he worked as a contractor from a company in Russia that was providing development services to Granlund. And the thing is that they changed the developers assigned to the tasks. So although the collaboration with that company was ongoing, the developer was not assigned on the project anymore and not reachable for questions. Now a different developer from Russia was doing the fixes. Yeni is the one that negotiates and makes promises to the customers. During the time that I tested that feature, she was the one communicating with the client directly. So here I am, looking at this feature that wasn't tested before, and the project context was such that I wasn't involved in any team meetings, nor meetings with Yeni or the customers. The information on what the clients need was obtained by Yeni only. But I had a close contact with Marit, who has her ways of getting information that is helpful for me during testing. And we discussed over Skype regularly. She provided valuable info, answered my questions, and she also gave me advice. My deliverables as a tester in the team were mostly bug reports. That was the way in which I gained visibility in the team. I also provided a sort of reports during my debriefing sessions with Marit. She would ask me information that she needed in the meetings that she was attending. So a release is approaching due to the fact that one of our customers is moving from the old version of the software to the new one, and they expect to have the budgeting feature here as well. And I'm 3 months into the project. I've spent some time testing other features, but budgeting is different from all the features that I tested on the project because there are no Finnish developers that I can ask questions to on the feature. As I discover it, there is a documentation, 1 year old, that is not necessarily up to date. Here is how the budgeting feature looks like. Our clients use it to keep track of their budgets. Of course, they also synchronize part of the data in here with data from a different feature. A budget is created per building or property, so multiple budgets need to be handled. And what's worth mentioning is that this is not a domain that I am particularly familiar with. I want to start off with some of the somewhat known challenges that I was facing and that I had to deal with. Firstly, there are gaps in communication in the team I was working in. I was, as we would say in Romania, wearing horse glasses. It's how we call wearing winkers. As I mentioned earlier, I had no meetings with some of the team members, which made my understanding of the feature and knowledge gain slower and more difficult. Plus, I was working remotely, and thus I was not exposed too often to the whole picture. The atmosphere in the team is such that it's sometimes difficult even for Marit to get information, not to mention me getting it. This is a representation of the communication channels we had in the team at the time as I see it. I exchanged some emails with specific questions related to the documentation with Kenneth. So I had some connection with him, but it mostly was references to the documentation and some clarifications on the app behavior. I didn't take very much advantage of this channel. With Marit, I had the strongest link. As we discussed often and quite freely, she was trying to get information from Yeni, needing to fill in the gaps sometimes because Yeni was not available most of the time. And all the information from Yeni and the customer was filtered through Marit to me. However objective Marit was, I had access to one source of information from one perspective. So, in this respect, I did feel a bit like one of those horses, except for the flies in the nose, of course. Another challenge I was facing was my lack of experience and knowledge on the project. Since I was only 3 months into the project, I had acquired by that time only limited knowledge. So I would need to take care not to suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's basically a cognitive bias. What happens is that the less skillful or the less knowledge I had on a matter, the more confident I felt about that skill or knowledge. And only by acquiring a certain level of knowledge could I realize how actually I knew, how little I actually knew. And as you can see, the levels of confidence would never be so high as when I was an ignorant, even if I became expert. A third challenge I was facing is related to time constraints and lack of synchronization. For example, there was lack of synchronization in sharing a report with Jenny. I was supposed to send it after Marit's review, and my input to Marit and her review were not timely enough to get to Jenny before the meeting with the customers. On the bright side, there were also some resources that I had available when testing. I had the one-year-old specification and Kenneth, who could answer questions on that. I also often had access to feedback from Marit on whatever was testing concerned. So although she didn't know the area specifically, she could help with advice and insights from the team and from her own testing experience. I was using my personal judgment to make decisions on what was relevant to test. So I'm using a critical thinking tool. I also used cheat sheets for test ideas, and we had a bug taxonomy in Jira for the whole project, actually, since the beginning. Unfortunately, most of them were in Finnish, which meant more effort to be able to use them from my side. Now that the setup has taken shape, I can start to delve deep into the dark side. I can start leading you to the path of some of the unknown unknowns that surrounded me. I identified 3 categories of things I didn't know that I didn't know. What I did not ask, what I ignored, and what I wasn't aware that I was focusing on. Let's visit each of them. The things I ignored: the customer's data ported from the old system was available on the test environment from a point on, and so I used real data in tests. But although I was warned that the database is huge, I did not consider creating reports with all the data that I had available. Another thing I ignored was the difference between other features I had tested on the project and this one, which is the nationality of the developer. So while other features were developed by Finnish developers who would most likely test using the Finnish version, this time the developer was not a Finnish speaker, so he would probably not test using the Finnish version. Well, neither did I this time, and this is what I ignored. Lorem ipsum text in multiple views of the feature, and in the Finnish version only. Okay, let's pass to the unasked questions. My purpose when testing this feature was to find the significant issues. When I found that out, my mental model was that if they should be significant, they would probably be found through testing complex flows that involve numbers. I did not validate this assumption by asking what would be significant for the customer and what problems they had in the past or what problems were usually appearing in the code of that Russian developer. The second question is one that I haven't asked myself. I knew that the budgeting feature looked similar to another feature that I spent some time testing. It was a feature with a similar functionality, but that applied to a restricted set of data. And when realizing the resemblance, I did not ask the question, in what ways is this feature different from the one I tested? Instead, I focused on the similarities. The third question is related to a mindset I had. I focused a lot on analyzing what I had covered and less on understanding what I left out with a certain approach or from a certain perspective. What happened next is what I call the fall into the rabbit hole. That mostly refers to my unawareness of my focus points. Firstly, I figured budgeting is about money. I don't know a lot about money, but they must be important in this feature, right? So I focused a lot on calculations, flows that involved sum changes, in which I looked for consistency in the numbers, without making a choice to focus on this versus other identified alternatives. I did not see those alternatives very clearly, and I haven't thought very much about them. I think now that there always are alternatives to a perspective that I have at some point in the testing process. For the second element in the rabbit hole, I will tell you a little story. This summer, I went in the mountains with my boyfriend for 3 days. We camped near a lodge. On the first day, we planned a route that was quite challenging because we were also carrying all of our equipment with us, so our hike ended up taking a whole day without any eating breaks and hardly any breaks of any kind. The third day, it was time to return to the initial lodge where we had already camped and to put our tent there. After 2 days of non-stop walking from morning to night, we got to the camping site from the first day, and I shouted in disappointment that we wouldn't be able to camp where we had 2 days ago because the spot was taken by another tent. That was not very fun because the terrain was really rocky and it was hard to find places to camp there. I was intrigued, though, by the amazement of my boyfriend when he looked at me and said, "No, it's not taken by another tent." Of course it was. There was a tent right there, 10 meters in front of us. Except, what I was looking at was this. Because I was tired and because I was thinking about a tent, my mind preferred to compare the rock with the tent rather than contrast it. I think that this is what happened at some point in my testing as well. I was so focused on comparing budgeting with a similar functionality that I missed the differences between them. And take a look, for example, at these two pictures. Can you notice any difference between them? I just want you to take some seconds and scan through them. Okay, so I will show you the differences I saw now. It's the multi-select functions. I didn't notice that, I didn't test for that, and it didn't work at all. So not asking the question about the differences framed my way of thinking. If I'm asking about similarities, I won't look at the differences. A third element of focus was a mind map that I created following the 1-year-old documentation on the area. And what I did was skim through a Word document that was quite long, contained a lot of details and rules on how the area should work, and I structured it into categories that were useful to me. That all sounds very pretty, except the model is not the real thing. It's very probable that some information from the original will slip. However exhaustive I planned to be, I missed some of the information. So structuring text from a spec can be useful. Creating a guiding scaffolding helps. But there is one more element. We are active readers. What we understand from what we read depends on our past experience, on the perspective that we have when reading. For example, I read the document from the test or role, and also the instructions that we may receive beforehand. These can change, so rereading might lead to different insights at different moments. The fourth focus point was elaborate flows. Because I didn't know much about the domain, I had the tendency to try to create complex flows in the hope that I would find the significant issues that the customers would care about. You can see in the mind map that I created different categories that were linked. What these are are connections between different parts of the applications. But I missed verifications on some straightforward UI components. And you can see them on the left. I added them in red later on. The clients would probably stumble into those, and they may find them significant. The last focus point that I will share with you was reporting what has been covered with very little emphasis on what hasn't been covered. When Marit asked me to provide a report to Jenny with details on the information related to testing using the specific client's database that we had, I was eager to put in all that I had covered, but I left out what I hadn't yet had time to cover. As you can see in the dashboard, there are no zero coverage elements, records, only ones with coverage 1 and 2. So I didn't think in these 2 dimensions of what has been covered and not, and this also set a mental model that I was using. Okay, so after all this mess of things ignored, the unquestioned assumptions, and the unawareness of the focus points, what could possibly come next? Well, a happy twist actually. Marit started testing herself using the Finnish version. She pointed out some of the issues that were typical for the dev that I missed, like language issues, the lorem ipsum text. And after that, I walked her through the mind map I had created with what I identified and covered. And she further helped with some insights on what could be relevant for the customers from her own experience. So for example, here she mentions a thing that bugged the same client in the past. So that could be relevant to consider here. She also helped with refreshing some information and providing a different perspective on my testing process. For example, she had mentioned in December that the feature was already existing for the customer in a previous version, and I realized on that moment that this was a relevant piece of information. But because I was dealing with a lot of new information, I did not recall this later on, and I only relied on my memory for this. So in January, she reminded me again, patiently, the same significant detail. After this, the veil of some of the unknown unknowns was lifted, and I discovered new information. I found new issues after reconsidering my mindsets and my models. But the story doesn't end here. There is another twist. The delivery promises were already made to the customer by that time, based on the info that I had found and provided before. So we had to live with some of the bugs found. Here is a part of the bugs logged in our backlog in Jira. As you can see, some of them are closed, but quite a few are still open. And they are assigned to the wish list, which is the list that developers usually don't touch again, so they will probably not get fixed in the future. Only customer complaints may get these bugs fixed. We reached the last part of the story. What I find valuable from my experience is all the lessons that I learned. This is what makes my story a success story. And I will talk about 3 underlying lessons. One important lesson for me is to strive for collaboration with team members, however difficult it may seem. It's really helpful to synchronize timely with people that can help. And in testing, getting a different perspective was very eye-opening for me. What's most challenging in my environment, I think, is the fact that I work remotely from the rest of the team. And this means that communication can sometimes turn into a struggle. Not being included in meetings in general, the fact that not everyone speaks English, have not helped either. In the budgeting case, I think that being exposed to general concerns about the future or to more client input could have helped in reinforcing some priorities for me and keeping me focused on different things than I actually focused on. And I'm trying different things to improve this communication. I try to talk to more people that are involved in a task so I can get multiple perspectives and worries on the area. I'm still working on finding out new ways to interact with team members that seem very busy and with whom I don't have a constant direct contact with, like the product manager. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the questions panel later on. Another lesson is that I'm not done when I first think so. When I think I'm done, I can use a mechanism of questioning critically whether I am really done or not. And counterfactual reasoning can help with this. That is, asking what different outcomes there could be or could have been in different situations. This helps in creating a mindset based on which I function. For example, this is the second point in the I'm not done when I first thought so lesson, and it's about reporting also what I have covered and what I haven't covered. Making visible what I haven't had time to cover helps with this mindset as well, because it's a reminder that I may not be done yet. So it triggers in my mind ideas on what there is left to cover and saves me from the false impression that I'm done. Another lesson I learned is to give myself as many chances as I can to recognize patterns. It's easier to recognize information than to recall it. By reading incoming bugs, I can understand what similar problems I could find in the area that I'm currently working on, and it helps me to make connections and see new details or perspectives upon the feature that I'm focusing on. I sometimes notice stuff that I think is relevant, but because there is so much new information around me, I sometimes forget it, no matter how important I realize it was. So by creating significant categories to put this information into, I'm again relying on recognition more than on recollection. So I try to put relevant details in my notes from a meeting or some observation that I have while testing. One other aspect that is related to this, and that's not on the slide, is the analysis that I made now of my experience. I think it helps me to see recurring patterns in how I approach problems, and so it helps me to learn more about myself. I think that a part of the process of improving my skills is knowing where I am, what I know, what I don't know, and more importantly, what I do and what I don't do. The thing is, the trickiest aspect in dealing with unknown unknowns is the fact that they're, well, unknown. So what I've learned from my experience and what I'm still learning every day is to apply tools in order to widen my perspective and catch part of their unknownness. But there will probably always be things that will take me by surprise while testing. I expect that. And the good part about that is that they are learning opportunities viewed in retrospect, as this one has been. So see them as such and learn as much as you can is my motto. Thank you for listening. I think it's time for questions now.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that presentation. We will now open the floor to your questions. So if you have any questions for Alexandra and you haven't already typed them, you can do so now. I'm just going to open up my screen here. So while you're typing your questions, I'm just going to bring your attention to our EuroSTAR webinar archive. And here you can view a recording of this webinar, as well as 85 other on-demand software testing webinars in a wide variety of software testing areas. Finally, the call for submissions to speak at the 2014 EuroSTAR conference in Dublin is now open. The theme for next year's conference is Diversity, Innovation, Leadership, as chosen by Programme Chair Paul Gerard. For more information on how to submit, please visit the EuroSTAR website. We'll now take a look at some of your questions. So let me just open them up here. And the first question I have for you here, Alexandra, is just in relation to your teams, the team you're referring to. It says, I guess you are not located in the same building or even country.
Yes, my team works in Finland, in Helsinki, and I work from Romania. The team dynamic is actually interesting in my case because even some of the team members that are from Finland are not working from Helsinki. We have 2 developers that work from a different town. And also, they only spend 2 days a week, I think, at the office, and the rest of them, the developers, work from home. So in terms of remoteness, I think we are all remote from each other in more or less remote.
The next question I have here is, it says, this to me is why mind maps are invaluable, as you can see what and where you've been, what you haven't, and what remains. Also, interconnections can be created along with dependencies. So using mind maps and checklists, what do you think, why do you think you still miss things?
Because the model is not the real thing. So I find mind maps useful as well. I use them on a daily basis, and that's right, it helps me a lot in structuring information and creating connections between different ideas. But what I'm trying to say is that in my case, I started from the initial documentation. I created a model, which was the mind map, and then I referred only to the model in order to create my tests. What I think could help is to come back occasionally to the original documentation. So I think that mind maps are very useful, but I expect that I will miss things while I transfer any information from an exhaustive and a comprehensive, or more comprehensive documentation to a model that I create.
The next question is, would making some sort of exploratory testing plan and being reviewed by the customer or customer representative help to uncover or resolve some of the issues?
So the question is if that plan could help in resolving some of the issues.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah, please repeat the question.
No problem, no problem. The question is, would making some sort of exploratory testing plan and being reviewed by the customer or customer representative help to uncover or resolve some of the issues?
Okay. The idea of an exploratory testing plan is a bit vague, but I think we could create artifacts that, by involving the customers, would be helpful. One of our challenges in the team is to actually get to involve the customers more and to get more direct access to them. So yes, we are looking into ways through which we could do that, and maybe providing this could help, but we currently don't have, as programmers or testers, direct contact. So So it's something that we are working on.
The next question is, did you consider participating in the meetings remotely? Did you ask for this?
Yes, I did, multiple times, but one argument that I received was that the problem was not the fact that I am remote. The problem is the fact that the meetings are held in Finnish. So some of the team members are not comfortable or don't know English, and so it's quite impossible for me to participate not knowing Finnish. But what has happened lately, actually, just starting a couple of weeks ago, for one of the features that we are implementing now, we decided to make an experiment that Marit proposed, I think. And what we are doing is we are having, the team is having daily 15 minutes meetings. And there have been discussions that the meetings would be transferred to English, and this way I could participate as well remotely. So the fact that I'm remote is not a problem, the language is a problem.
The next question is, when it's unknown unknowns, don't you need some outside help to open your eyes to what you are not seeing?
I think you do, and this is what happened to me. Marit was part of my outside help. I think that building up mechanisms that incorporate some outside information, like counterfactual reasoning, can also help. So I can contribute to making some of the unknowns knowns as well, but communicating with other people is most certainly very helpful, or it has been so far for me.
The next question is, how often do you meet personally the team in Finland?
I went there in the first week when I started the project for our kickoff. And I will go there this week actually and spend Thursday with them at the office. So as you can see, not very often. I work mostly from the office, and as I said, from the office in Cluj. And as I said, the problem would not be that I am not in Finland. One of the problems is also that they are not at the office. So if I went there, for example, for a week, I would only be with them at the office for 2 days. So there are more changes to be introduced in the team so that I can actually spend times physically together in the same room with them.
The next question is, are you istqb certified?
No, I'm not istqb certified.
And the next question. The next question I have here is, can you perhaps comment on prevention versus detection in your future approaches?
Prevention versus detection of bugs, or it's not very clear for me what the question is about. I will assume that it's about prevention of bugs appearing and detection of bugs in the test process. So I'm mostly involved on the test side, and I have little influence on the whole process that goes on in the team, but I try to think about that, and I could probably discuss on this. It might take a while though, but we are trying, me and Marit, we are trying to design and implement different ideas in order to help make the work better for all the team. So we have thought about, for example, doing pair testing sessions with the developers. So this means that I would spend more time testing a feature before it was declared done together with the developer, so that he could learn about what I'm doing, about how I'm testing, and this way, on the long term, it may mean prevention of bugs, because the developer is learning a bit how to test and is learning what sort of problems to think about more.
Okay.
And I think that I just want to wrap up. I think that these two activities go hand in hand. So in our team, I don't see how we could only have prevention or only detection. We're working from both sides all the time. That's all I had to say for this.
Great. I'm sorry for interrupting you there as well.
No problem.
I think that's kind of all the questions that have come through for now. There's a few comments. Just thank you for the presentation and just offering tips. One tip that's mentioned here is a tip at the beginning of the assignment. Do you have any specific concerns? This often leads to clues on what matters for the stakeholder.
Okay.
But as for the questions, I think that's everything from the audience for now. And if you have any other questions for Alexandra, you can send them to me, Dara, at EuroSTAR conferences, and we can get an answer for you. The webinar is now over. I just want to thank Alexandra for taking time out to do today's presentation, and I'd like to thank all the attendees for attending the webinar.
Thanks as well for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Goodbye.